Salutations and welcome to this Hegelian synthesis of Blithering Thoughts at the Hopeful Humanist Cafe. A post-modern, surrealist, phenomenological, first-person, empirical exploration of ideas and flow, the good life, t-shirt notions, etcetera moments, and resources for our spiritual toolbox. Wow, that was a mouthful. Hashtag. Okay then. This is a Just Some Guy production, and I'm that guy, your host, Steve, the Hopeful Humanist. Today in episode number 22, entitled Be Well, Do Well, I hope to achieve three things. I want to share some things, suggest something, and propose. But first, let's start with a couple quotes of the day. So yeah, I'm on the other side of the pond now. I'm no longer in France. I've returned from my vacation. My dynamic now moment has transformed into this morning episode, this morning file, I guess you could say. And so the sounds of life that you hear are on the other side of the pond. I'm in the basement of my home, doing my walk and talk, moving from the workshop to the downstairs office. So I got my crumple notes in the other room. I got my different resources on in the office of the downstairs, and I got a couple quotes here. So the first one comes to us from Albert Einstein. The true sign of intelligence is not knowledge, but imagination. Okay, so this synthesis of the two different podcasts that I've been working on is going to be focusing on creativity, attempting to create a creative spring so that we can navigate this difficult world, and also the happiness quest. Those are the kind of things that I want to continue to focus on. So in the spirit of creativity, this second quote comes to us from Abraham H. Maslow. The book is The Farther Reaches of Human Nature. It's a long quote, so I apologize. And he is considered by some to be the grandfather, or one of the grandfathers, or a grandparent, right? A grandparent of the positive psychology movement. So he's given us some thoughts about creativity here. I tried to describe to them what these primary creative people are like. They are precisely the ones that make trouble in an organization, usually. I wrote down a list of some of their characteristics that would be guaranteed to make trouble. They tend to be unconventional. They tend to be a little bit queer, unrealistic. They are often called undisciplined, sometimes inexact, unscientific, that is, by a specific definition of science. They tend to be called childish by their more compulsive colleagues, irresponsible, wild, crazy, speculative, uncritical, irregular, emotional, and so on. This sounds like a description of a bum or a bohemian or an eccentric. And it should be stressed, I suppose, that in the early stages of creativeness, you've got to be a bum, you've got to be a bohemian, you've got to be crazy. This brainstorming technique may help us toward a recipe for being creative, as this comes from people who have already successfully been creative. They let themselves be like this in the early stages of thinking. They let themselves be completely uncritical. They allow all sorts of wild ideas to come into their heads, and in great bursts of emotion and enthusiasm, they may scribble out a poem or a formula or the mathematical solution or work up the theory or design the experiment. Then, and only then, do they become secondary, become more rational, more controlled, and more critical. If you try to be rational and controlled and orderly in this first stage of the process, you'll never get to it. Now, the brainstorming technique, as I remember it, consisted in just this, in not being critical, letting yourself play with ideas, free association, letting them come out on the table in profusion, and then only later on tossing away those ideas which are bad or useless and retaining the ones which are good. If you're afraid of making this kind of crazy mistake, then you'll never get any of the bright ideas either. Wow. I just feel truly inspired by this sentiment that Abraham H. Maslow's sharing with us. So I guess the hope will be that somehow I might be able to inspire someone today who might be struggling with the imagination. And to that end, I have some things, I indicate I have some things I want to share, something I want to suggest, and something that I want to propose. So the thing that I'd like to share is just provide some information about other cool podcasts that are out there that you might want to experiment with, explore. The first one that I've been listening to quite a bit lately is The Very Bad Wizards. And not as much, but a portion of a couple of episodes I have listened to from the Partially Examined Life, both kind of philosophical and psychological in their makeup, their essence. So check them out. Now, the thing I'd like to propose is it relates to the resources that I'm going to suggest that perhaps you check out. So right now I'm reading a book from Yuval Noah Harari, and the book is called Sapiens, and I'm only halfway through. And it's interesting because a friend of mine recommended of it, and when I shared the thought with another friend that perhaps he might check it out, he said he'd actually read it, and he was significantly disappointed with that book, so much so that he doesn't appear to be interested in reading any more books from that particular author. So I leave it to you, right? Because I don't have a monopoly on the truth, and I'm not a historian, so I can't really give an account whether or not it's an accurate account of the human experience, Homo sapiens. But reading this book, I became aware of another book, and it's in the queue for me to read, by the same author, Yuval Noah Harari, and it's called 21 Lessons in the 21st Century. And when I became aware of the title, it actually caught my attention right away. And it kind of linked up with the t-shirt idea I've had years ago about this idea of a t-shirt that might say, be well, do well. It's related to this idea of mental health, that if we take care of ourselves, it's difficult to be healthy in this world, but if we can figure out how to do that, then we're going to do the best that we can in this world. So the question I have, I'm going to propose in a second, but first I want to do an activity. So I've identified that the main resource I'm suggesting that you check out, and it's risky because I haven't even read it myself, is this book by Yuval Noah Harari, and you can go online to YouTube and you can check out a TED Talk that he has that's related to Sapiens, and the video I'm watching right now is a Google Talk that's featuring Yuval, and it sparked some of the ideas that motivated this particular episode, Be Well, Do Well, linking these ideas with the t-shirt about mental health. So before I pose the question, though, I just want to do a quick little activity. I think that if we're trying to promote and encourage thinking outside the box, if we're going to attempt to do what Maslow's talking about, there are some activities that we can engage in that could increase the likelihood that maybe we might get a little bit more creative, that we can get the creative spring flowing. So this is a game I've been playing a lot with family, friends, and at work. It's called Codenames, and there's the word game, Codenames, and then there's Codenames Pictures, and I enjoy both of them. So that's one activity you might be able to do. But I'd also like to bring your attention to another game called Taboo, which I think also helps people kind of think outside the box. And so there's a word that I'm gonna hope that you might imagine that you might be able to say wherever it is that you are in response to some words, some phrases that I share with you. But on the card, it indicates there's some words I just can't say. So I can't say 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. There's 5 words here that I can't say. So let's start this. So I'm going to say about 3 to 4 different words, stop, and then reveal what the word is. Okay, so there you are. Put on your thinking cap and get ready to try to intuit what this word is. Light, blinding, eastern rising, glaring. Okay, what'd you come up with? So the words I couldn't say, and maybe this might help you figure out what it is. I couldn't say bright, warm, summer, cloudy, or weather. The word I wanted you to say was sunny. Okay, sunny. So my thought is that sometimes when we're going to engage in some serious thinking, in terms of trying to solve a problem, sometimes it could be really help to orient ourselves for that moment, to kind of to set the theme that what we want to conjure, to bring into this moment is the imaginative, creative juices. So the question I have is, so I've shared with you that I think there could be some value in you checking out Very Bad Wizards, Partially Examined Life. I'm suggesting with some risk that you read this book from Yuval Noah Harari called 21 Lessons in the 21st Century. And I'm doing that because I'm reading another book and I've watched part of his Google Talk. And in his interview with his Google Talk, he's identified that one of the problems of modern times for humanity would be that we can't anticipate what the world's going to look like. We don't know what, in a sense, what tomorrow will bring. Now, as a parent, this is pretty concerning, because I guess one of the things that I'd like to do is prepare my kids for the future. But how do I prepare my kids for the future when I don't even know what it's going to look like, because we're in a constantly changing world? There's this quote, I think it goes to William James. And there's just a portion of the quote that I've incorporated with, the greater thought. It's this idea in terms of like the 21st century, that the future is unknown and unknowable. We've all been thrust into the blooming, buzzing confusion of a constantly changing world. And in terms of stress, one of the things that definitely escalates stress is uncertainty, not knowing things, not being able to prepare for things, not being able to anticipate things. And we can see that there are upsurges in depression and anxiety, mental health concerns. And so now I would like to pose my question. And it's an invitation to imagine, to anticipate what Yuval might be offering in this book that I've invited you to read, that I haven't read and you haven't read. So like, what might he say about the 21st century? He's writing a book about the 21 lessons. My question is, what are competencies that we should foster for our children, in our children, for the 21st century? And what should a dinner table curriculum for family look like in terms of fostering those competencies, right? So I'm asking the question, if there are certain things or skills or these things that we can call meta skills or competencies that, my children should have and your children should have, or if you don't have children, your niece and your nephew, or, if you're a teacher, the students that you're teaching, what are the competencies for the 21st century that they should have? And as parents, as teachers, in terms of, these opportunities that we have, like dinner table discussion times, what should be the curriculum? What should be the content? What should we bring to those moments so that we can start to nurture and foster these kind of competencies? So I'm inviting you to make your list, because I think that this is something that we should critically reflect upon. We in Ontario right now, there's been discussion about the curriculum for elementary levels, and the idea of sex education, and there's some people saying like this should be in the curriculum, this shouldn't be in the curriculum. But I'm saying like let's go above that and ask, in terms of the curriculum, what learning objectives are they meeting? What should we be holding up as something that is essential for our kids to learn in terms of these meta skills? So I have my little list. I encourage you to maybe take a pause and write down what your list is. And my list consists of, and it's not exhaustive, and as I've shared in the past, I don't have a monopoly on the truth. But here are some things that I think that could be really important competencies for us to nurture in our children. Number one, and in no order of importance, I put analytic skills. This idea of being able to break something down, to kind of analyze and to break it into its component parts and see how things fit together. The idea of, this is the antecedent and this is the causal outcome. The other thing I think that would be important is critical thinking. The questioning of assumptions, the wondering, the limits of certain thought, right? And maybe wondering if maybe we've got things wrong or we need to do things differently. For instance, to that end, in terms of critical thinking, there is a quote by, I think it's O.E. Wilson, that says the problem of contemporary times is that we have Paleolithic emotion, medieval institutions, and godlike technology. So in terms of critical thinking, one of the thoughts I had when I was putting all this together in my mind's eye is, are we doing education wrong? If we do have these things called schools that are based on medieval institutions, and that's just a historical unfolding, knowing that the world is changing, should the way that we view education, should the way that we approach education, should there be a fundamental change in the very fabric of what we're doing? I don't know what the answer is, but a part of me was thinking maybe we might be teaching kids things that were relevant to yesteryear, and they're not going to be helpful in the future. And we have to think about what kind of competencies make sense to teach our kid. Do we make sense to teach our kids for a world that is uncertain? Because if it's an uncertain world, it's going to create stress. We're going to have anxiety go up. And what we might find at times is that our kids get caught up in the freeze response. They just can't move forward, that they're just stuck. And that would be a really overwhelming place to be. So because of this, another competency would be relationship building. The idea of, in terms of the happiness research, if there are increased levels of anxiety and depression, one of the things that we have to do are foster relationships, because happiness is, relationship is fundamental to happiness. The other thing, too, to consider is that there seem to be a diversity of relationship styles that are emerging, and generations might be confused about how to be okay with these changes. I mean, whoever's initiating the change, I guess change won't be so threatening. For others, where the change is it appears to be thrust upon them, it might seem to be very overwhelming. We have polyamory that seems to be becoming more popular, at least in the papers. I've become much more aware of it. And, there are different thinking that in terms of civilizations, these aren't hunter-gatherer times and polyamory just can't work. And others are saying, no, that's not the case. So for us to think about it, but I mean, there are just these different options that exist for people in terms of the diversity of relationship styles, that we need to figure out how to develop healthy relationships. How are we going to tackle jealousy? How are we going to nurture the various relationships that we have, knowing that we only have so much emotional energy to contribute, that it's finite? Emotional intelligence would be another competency. If the world is overwhelming, if it's hard to be healthy in this world, if depression's going up, if anxiety is going up, people need to be able to identify their feelings. They need to be able to label them, to be able to talk about them. And then they need to manage those feelings. They have to figure out ways to stand up to the anxiety, to stand up to the depression, and to work with one another to create places of safety. And in the process, because a relationship is fundamental, not only manage my emotions, it's helpful if I can understand and empathize and put myself in the shoes of someone else and understand their feelings to help them manage their feelings, because as parents, we are the prefrontal cortex of our children. Another competency would be creativity. And that's the whole focus of Blithering Thoughts about t-shirt ideas, right? I'm attempting to say that out of all the things that we can do to be happy, in terms of the correlation that we've discovered between creativity and happiness, I'm putting a lot of emphasis on creativity. I'm saying that this is a really important competency to teach, to develop, to nurture, to recognize in our young people, because if we're going to be facing problems in this unknown future world, we're going to have to figure out how to think outside the box so we can tackle these problems. And another one, the last one on my list for right now, would be this idea of a competence. So like some people might say, is that really a competency? I just feel that it seems to fit. It's kind of like the facts, the factiness of this list kind of suggests that it ought to include this idea of initiative. This is important to outline, because if sometimes the experience will be to freeze because the world is so overwhelming and uncertain, then how can we take initiative? There might be fear of failure, which, it seems like this is a big obstacle for people learning. I shared in previous podcasts by a professor, Tal, who worked at Harvard, said, learn to fail or fail to learn. This is a truism. So that's my list. And so the question I posed was, what are the competencies that we should foster or consider or think about for our children as we move forward into the 21st century? And I suggested that just, once we can identify this list, whatever this list might be, then there's the idea of, well, what's the curriculum? What's the content? And in terms of dinner time conversation, I think that, there could be, that the dinner time conversation in and of itself for be well, do well, that idea of good mental health, and the development of these competencies for do well, be well, that just being at the dinner table and having discussion together, that is a protective factor, right? That is a big deal. But while we're there, what are the things that we can talk about? What are the activities that we can plan to do together, playing games. I think that's really important to creativity, to relationship building, to analytic skills, and emotional intelligence. It's a big one. And playing board games is a big part of what we do at our home here. And right now, the one game we've been playing is I'm for a loss in the moment. The train game, where you get destination cards and you have to build your trains on a track. Yeah, I'm just going to leave it at that. I forget what it's called, but it's been a really popular game. So in terms of curriculum right now, one of the things that we're watching with our boys is Little Women from 1984 with Winona Ryder. And I think that show is a great example of an appropriate content for fostering creativity, because in the show, the character Jo, she really is focusing on her creative capacities and her imaginative ability through writing. And just some really good conversation that we're able to have there. So I'm not providing answers, right? I don't want to suggest that I have the answers, but I think the questions are the question that I'm asking is critical in terms of what are competencies for the 21st century, not just for our kids, but also for us. And what are the things, what's the content? What should we be looking at so we can develop them, these competencies for ourselves and for our kids? And for me, the competency of creativity is essential. Similarly, relationship building also. So thank you for joining in for my first discussion on this side of the other side of the pond. I'm back in Canada, in southwestern Ontario, in K-Town, and we'll be going in terms of fostering connectedness in the family. Today we're going to go pick some apples and then make some apple pie, so that's going to be delicious. But I want to leave with my novel first sentence. It goes like this. Sophie turned off her phone, grabbed some day-olds from the cafe kitchen. Eve was into freeganism, and slipped out into the cherry blossom carpeted street, smiling while mindfully breathing. She was in pursuit of time. Okay, well, thank you for joining me here at the Hopeful Humanist Cafe for this synthesis with Blithering Thoughts. I look forward to our next tip of the iceberg conversation. I wish you well, peace, and take care.